listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the place to learn about new technology and technological advances before they become mainstream. This podcast is sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. It's not about the destination. It's about going someplace you never thought possible. Go to imaginenext.ingrammicro.com to find out more. Let's get into it.
Welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. I'm your host, Shelby Skrhak, and our guest today is Jonathan Brawn, Principal Consultant for Samsung. Jonathan, welcome back.
Thank you, Shelby. It's great to be here. Appreciate you having me on the show again.
Absolutely. Well, today we are talking about Samsung displays for gaming, but first let's set the scene with a bit of a recap. So Samsung is becoming a big player in esports, both professional and amateur. So tell us a little bit about that.
Big player. Nice pun. I like that. No, absolutely. Samsung has been known for display technologies, and the display is a critical aspect of any kind of gaming situation, whether it's at home on the couch or in a gigantic arena where you're competing. Esports has become big business. In fact, it's one of the second most viewed sports after the NFL, which is crazy to me.
Yeah.
And Samsung's done a lot in esports historically. They actually used to have a team they sponsored back in the mid 2000s. So I think up through about 2015, they had a team, the Samsung Galaxy. They love that name. So of course, anybody who knows the mobile products is familiar with the Galaxy smartphones and things like that. And that was a League of Legends team that they sponsored for a number of years. They're no longer doing that, but they have had some strategic alliances with a couple of different teams where they're trying to basically provide display technologies. I believe in 2020, they had a sponsorship partnership with T1, I think it was another team. I am not a competitive gamer. While I am an avid gamer, I'm not a competitive gamer. So some of this stuff I have to kind of go back to my memory and dig up. But really what it comes around to is helping provide proper display technologies, because that's the window onto the virtual world that these athletes, and I know it feels weird to say that sometimes talking about esports, I still want to go back to my parents and go, see, I told you, you should have let me play video games more as a kid.
Exactly.
But these athletes are using these technologies, and it's critical that they have displays that can provide the experience they need so that they can use their skills.
Right. Well, you mentioned Samsung. It's working with a lot of professional sports leagues, whether an official capacity, those are the displays, those are the machines that they trust the most. But, for the professional esports league or team, what are their needs?
Sure. So what you're really looking for is not necessarily display size. So as I said when I was on the show the last time, I'm a display size junkie. It's not necessarily having the biggest monitor. You need very high refresh rates so that you can have proper frame rates out of your games. You need very low input latency so that if I press a button, the action takes place appropriately on screen, so I'm not being kind of hindered by the latency of my display. I need very bright, very vibrant coloring because you need to have very accurate images, and you need a system that's just 100% bulletproof, reliable. It just works.
So these essential elements, the high refresh rates, the high resolutions, these things that you mentioned. But I guess I wonder if we can do a little bit of 101 here. So the refresh rate then refers to the frequency at which your monitor refreshes the image. How is that measured? And I guess, what does that really mean for the end user?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's easy to get confused on that because there's a lot of terminology going around, especially now, where you're going to hear terms like high refresh rate, variable refresh rate. There's different standards from like NVIDIA where they have G-Sync and AMD where they have FreeSync, and they're all relating to refresh rate. And it can get to be a little bit of kind of a muddy area, especially when you're trying to build out an esports lab or an arena or even just buying a monitor for home. So when we start talking about refresh rate, what you look at on your screen is not actually moving images. What you're looking at is a series of still images very rapidly changing so that your brain fills in motion. And this is the kind of thing that we all played with as kids with something like a flip book, just obviously a lot more advanced. And so when we look at our refresh rate, it is how quickly a display is able to draw the full image on screen. And it is measured in hertz. So we're talking about frequencies or cycles per second. So how many times per second can that screen refresh or redraw the whole image? Higher refresh rates means that it's capable of higher frame rates. And frame rates are a thing that any PC gamer in the audience is going to go, oh yeah, I want more of those. I want more of those FPS things, frames per second in this case. And what the relationship there is you have faster images coming out of your computer. So you're playing at higher frame rates, which leads to smoother animations, which leads to a better experience for the player. You're having to draw more quickly for the monitor to keep up with it. And if you don't have a high refresh rate monitor, like let's say you've got a 60 hertz monitor, which is a pretty standard refresh rate for desktop monitors or even commercial displays, wouldn't be something you would see in a gaming monitor in most cases or a higher end consumer television. But let's say you're there and I'm driving more than 60 frames per second. 1 frame per second would match up with 60 hertz, one cycle. 60 cycles per second, 60 frames per second, they're going to match. If I go faster than that, you're going to get what's known as tearing. And you're going to see that as the image will kind of chunk on screen, where you'll see usually horizontal lines where the monitor can't keep up with the movement of what's going on screen. And parts of it will kind of tear and slide apart. And anybody who's played on a cheap monitor knows what I'm talking about, particularly if you're into retro gaming, where modern computers can drive stupidly high frame rates in games from 20 plus years ago. You know what I'm talking about, which is where sometimes you'll see things like VSync. This is an older term that gets used still a lot. It is synchronizing the refresh rate of the monitor to the frame rate of the game. And that'll help minimize tearing. But today we've moved into very high refresh rate monitors where you're going to see 120 hertz not being uncommon, 144 hertz being very, very common. In fact, that's why some 1440p monitors, which is an odd resolution, 1440 tall is definitely, it's an in-between between 1080p and 4K. But that was popularized because they were some of the first high refresh rate monitors, so gamers loved them. Now we're seeing about 240 hertz being very common in like Samsung's Odyssey and Odyssey Neo gaming desktop monitors, variety of different sizes. So the faster your monitors can refresh, the more frame rate they can accommodate without tearing. And then you're also seeing, I mentioned variable refresh rate. So that's kind of a universal standard. AMD has their FreeSync, NVIDIA has G-Sync, which are all different, basically protocols for synchronizing your frame rates at high levels to high refresh rates. So I can get, if I'm playing a first-person shooter, or I'm playing something like League of Legends, which is a MOBA. I always forget what it's a multi-battle lane game. I don't play them, so forgive me. I'm going to get yelled at by someone in the audience, but that's fair. But you're getting the ability for your characters to move much faster motion, and you're not getting that tearing or smearing, much more accurate. So it's a really, really critical aspect of gaming. That's part of what drives a lot of the desktop monitor designs you see for specific gaming monitors.
What are the very highest refresh rates? I guess the very cutting edge.
Yeah, commonly right now it's going to be 240 hertz. You will see sometimes companies will advertise higher refresh rates for large monitors like home theater TVs and things like that. That's usually some form of interpolation where somebody will say, oh, well, it's 480 hertz or something really crazy high like that. There are displays that can handle 480 hertz. Very famously, there was a film when they did a re-release of The Lord of the Rings. They did it in high frame rate, high refresh rate, where it was actually filmed at 480 hertz. Made a lot of people either feel nauseous because it was too real and it was too lifelike, or I personally walked out of the film. And this was several years ago. I walked out of the theater because it was too realistic. You couldn't hide the errors in the props, and you couldn't hide that things look like props when it's that photorealistic. But commonly in a desktop monitor, you're going to see 240 hertz, which is what Samsung's Odyssey and Odyssey Neo products are capable of doing, which is really what you want to look for in a high-performance gaming desktop display at this point.
Yeah. So we went over the refresh rates. Okay, so then resolution. In photography, it would be DPI or dots per inch. But what about monitors or displays? I guess, how is the resolution measured, and how does that translate for the gamer?
Yeah, so it is measured in pixels. So just like we're looking at output from after I take my photo, I run the output through Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever, and I end up with a JPEG or a PNG or whatever given resolution. We're not dealing with anything any different. Gaming desktop displays or gaming displays in general still work in pixels. So you're going to see everything from 1920 by 1080, 1080p. I mentioned 1440p. That's a little more of a wider resolution. There's also a couple different 1440ps where you'll see ultra wide versus kind of standard 16 by 9. Ultra wide being preferred by some gamers because it does give you a wider field of view, and typically a curved display, which is more immersive, which from a personal standpoint, that is the one time I like a curved display. So fair enough. I was never a big fan of the curved big TVs that some companies were selling for a while. Controversial opinion, I know, but I wasn't a huge fan of them. But for gaming desktop displays, curved displays are fantastic for that. But you're also going to see 4K. The thing, though, with really high resolutions is while it's desirable because you're seeing more detail, and we're just kind of becoming that 4K UHD 3840 by 2160 has become kind of a normal standard. It's only recently been that we can drive monitors of that resolution at high enough refresh rates and at high enough frame rates for proper gaming, which is why a lot of gaming still takes place in the 1080p space, where we can drive very, very high frame rates, 100 frame rates, 100 FPS plus in a lot of games, just depending on the age of the game and the type of game. And so a lot of gamers will prefer that. So that's why you still do see. Now, this is rolling out things like console gaming, because when we're talking about esports, that's almost entirely PC gaming. So it's going to be desktop. Console gaming is a whole nother discussion. But yeah, that's been one of those things that we're just now starting to see a transition. And with some 8K displays being out there, usually larger home theater televisions, that's still kind of like the super cutting edge. There are not a lot of 8K desktop products yet. And trying to drive that is still that's the bleeding edge of the cutting edge there. So you're still seeing a lot of what's going to sound like older resolutions, and it's going to sound like lower resolutions to a layperson, especially if you're going shopping for a new TV at your local big box store and going, I got to have a 4K set. Why am I not gaming in 4K? It's all about speed. It really has become all about speed.
And for example, like in networking, you can only get the output of the lowest common denominator, I guess. Is it the same with gaming systems where, your monitor can be capable of, the very top levels, but if your system cannot deliver those refresh rates and all of those things, then it doesn't, it's kind of moot.
Yeah, absolutely right. Your GPU becomes a bit of a bottleneck. So whether you've got the latest from NVIDIA or the latest from AMD, I'm not going to take sides there. I'm not team green or team red. I'm team what looks good and works great on my computer, and what I can manage to find, because obviously chip shortages have been a real thing. And also basically all the cryptocurrency miners have been soaking up so many GPUs. We're finally getting back to where there are availability of graphics cards for those of us at home, finally. But it really is a bottleneck where if my laptop does have a discrete GPU, it's a very nice one. It's a GTX from NVIDIA. I think it's a 1660. And that's decent enough for what I use. It can do some light to mid-duty gaming. But if I try to push it really hard, I've got a high refresh rate 4K monitor in front of me. I can't really drive the maximum performance of what this monitor is capable of off of my laptop, because the GPU becomes the bottleneck. I just can't render out that much in terms of frames per second. As much as I want to, I do travel for a living, so I don't have a gigantic gaming laptop because the power supplies tend to look like house bricks, and I'm not toting around an extra 7 pounds of power supply after 5 pounds or 6 pounds of laptop. So that does become a limit.
Yeah. Well, so with these basics of display down, what do organizations or businesses that are setting up an esports space need to know about outfitting an esports arena? I guess, what are those common challenges that they're going to face?
Yeah, great question. And it does tend to be a little more expensive than one thinks, because you do have to buy products where normally if I was outfitting, let's take a school, for example. So this is a very common application today. More and more schools, and I don't want to have everyone out there in the audience immediately jump to, big universities or anything. No, I'm talking like even elementary schools and high schools are developing esports programs, because it's not only something that drives a lot of participation from the students, it's very popular. It can generate revenue, sponsorships and things like that. Esports has become big business, period. It's just, go look at the League of Legends tournaments and things that go on with our friends at Riot Games. They do just insane spectacle for what they're able to generate. So this is big business at all levels, and something that anyone can approach with a little bit of know-how. So, you take a local high school. There's been a lot of grant money been put out in recent years to help this, especially with COVID funds for technology that have been made available to schools. So now we're approaching to build something like an esports gaming facility. And I don't necessarily mean a giant arena like you see in Vegas, although those are a thing, separate conversation. I'm talking about maybe a 15 or 20 station high school level. This is not like building a computer lab where I can use a $150 monitor. I can use, the $800 Best Buy special. No offense, I'm not using the inexpensive, basic off the shelf PC. I need to have something that's capable of gaming. Usually dressed up with a lot of RGB LEDs. So sorry for anybody who doesn't care for that aesthetic.
Right.
I don't personally, fair enough, but that's a thing. You're going to have lots of rainbow lights. Get used to it.
I know.
But I love it. Just slap RGB LEDs on it, call it a game or something.
Exactly.
And you can sell it.
It's a gaming chair. It's a gaming desk. It's everything.
I actually saw an RGB LED gaming chair the other day and I had to scratch my head and go,
why?
Does that run on batteries or do you have a power cord coming off I don't want to think about it.
Right.
But yeah, you do have to think about it. Will be a little bit more involved. Also, a lot of times there's more complexity where you're thinking around, like we talked about refresh rate. Well, we need to deal with very low latency. So you've got to have systems that are chosen for low input lag. So very, very, very good refresh rates and response times on the displays. That's one of the things Samsung does really well with their QLED display products because they're 1 millisecond or less response time. So you're getting very rapid response from the display. And investing in the displays is really key. And no, that's not just because I'm here because of Samsung. That's actually very true regardless of your favorite gaming brand. But you've got to think about then, well, what else am I going to do with the space? And I don't mean that from the standpoint of, yes, kids are coming in and playing. Are we going to live stream? That's a big aspect of gaming. So if we've got a team, do we want them to live stream so that maybe we have an audience that can generate revenue? We get ad sponsorships. So there's a lot of reasons why you'd want to do that. That's not just I'm going to make a career out of being a Twitch streamer. I'm not, but hey, so you've got to think about a lot of overlap with broadcast technologies where I've got to take that video that's being output by these various computers. And not only do I have to get it to the monitors, but I may also have to get it into a capture system. And so a lot of times you'll have a broadcast style production room connected with an esports facility where you're going to have things switching, streaming, capture, editing capability, graphics production. So there's some additional components to it that aren't immediately obvious. And this can get into the ridiculous end when you do start talking about professional, high dollar esports where we're having large displays. You may have an audience area for an arena, then that obviously gets much more complex, but it's approachable even at the basic level where almost anybody can tackle it. You just have to be aware it's a little more complex than building a simple computer lab. Also, you can't put enough network resources in. You just can't. You're going to get into things like multi-gig networks where, normally in a school, you might just throw a standard 1 gigabit Ethernet network at it or rely on Wi-Fi. And that's fine for a lot of things. But if I've got a lot of video streams and I've got a lot of high bandwidth gaming going on, you might want to look at 2 gigabit Ethernet or 4.5 gigabit Ethernet. Very uncommon in standard consumer applications and even in standard office applications or school applications. But this is where it starts to make more practical sense to have that available.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned that, we're not just talking about the professional. We're talking about amateur and we're talking about K through 12 applications for this. So there's a lot of opportunity to, to help businesses, organizations, schools set that up. So, as a consultant for Samsung, of course, all the ins and outs of Samsung displays, but, what is the role then of Ingram Micro to help resellers or partners really have access to that level, that type of expertise?
Sure, absolutely. So for anybody who's thinking about getting into this kind of integration or this part of the business, don't be scared about it. Ingram Micro is a good partner for that. They do have a dedicated esports group. They've actually just done a huge renovation at the Business Technology Center in Buffalo, where they set up a whole kind of mock esports arena, which is great because it's an actual live hands-on area to look at a lot of these technologies. I'm hoping I'll get to tour that next time up at Ingram's facility. But very, very, very nice set of folks who can help with a lot of that planning. Of course, they have access to all the great vendors like Samsung and others where they can help you interface. Like they've got a dedicated Samsung team there. There's 4 staff who can help with questions around displays. Samsung does offer B2B, actual gaming desktop product, where a lot of other manufacturers just have business to consumer. So you don't get a lot of the benefits of the business grade product. So you can get access to those. They have a whole design services team at Ingram Micro that can help with planning and design around helping you figure out if you aren't familiar with it. If you're used to traditional AV or used to traditional computing or IT or structured cabling, they can help. They even have installation services through digital transformations there that can help with that. And heck, I think they even can do financing for things like that if it comes in and you need help. So they'd be a great partner for things like that. And I think it's definitely worth checking out. So if you have an opportunity, they can definitely back you up, even if you're not sure that you'd be able to do it on your own.
Right. Well, as we do start to wrap up our episode, we always ask our guests the same final question. And I've asked you this before, so feel free to expand on your last one or go a different direction. But where do you see technology going in the next year?
Ooh, so this is going to be a fun one. And I'm going to keep it on gaming because this is just fun. It's been our topic today. I think it's an exciting area. I think the whole concept of esports is going to continue to overtake traditional entertainment media, because you start looking at the statistics for all of the youngest generations, and I don't mean Gen X and millennials, but those after Gen Z and beyond, where less broadcast television is being consumed, much more platforms like YouTube, like Twitch. It's being very common for people to get their entertainment. And I have to admit, I do it too. I mean, I'm definitely a little older than that, but hey, I watch Twitch for fun sometimes where hey, I'm not going to actually play that game because it's a little frustrating. My Twitch reflexes, no pun intended, aren't what they used to be. So I'll watch somebody else play it and watch their misery, pop some popcorn and have fun.
Yeah.
So I admit I do it. And that's going to continue to drive gaming as a major source of entertainment, not just playing games. I mean, that's not going to go away. That is still big business. But watching games being played. And, there's not really that big a gap between current professional physical sports and current professional esports. I'm sitting on the couch either way, cheering on my team, right?
Yeah.
So that's going to continue to drive better and better desktop displays like Samsung just released, shameless plug, because I think this is very cool. It is the most ridiculous thing on the planet, but I want one. The Odyssey Arc, ARK, it is their 55-inch super curved gaming desktop monitor. Yes, a 55-inch gaming desktop monitor. It has the Sound Dome speaker system. It's a Dolby Atmos speaker system. I just love the brand, Sound Dome, but it's got the most ridiculous setup. You're going to see more things like that where people are taking gaming seriously. This is not a fringe hobby. It is mainstream big business. We're going to see a whole group of new graphics cards getting released. NVIDIA's tooling up to release their 4000 series. Intel's bringing out some new dedicated GPUs at very low cost points. They're going to be great for creators, but also really good for gamers because they're going to really target aggressive pricing, even though they don't perform quite as well as NVIDIA and ATI. So we're starting to see kind of a bit of a renaissance in PC gaming where it's going to become much more accessible, much more commonplace, and frankly, much more accepted to be a gamer because this is becoming mainstream. So we're going to see continuing adoption. And, the whole console gaming scene has just been crazy. Look at how tough it is to get things like a PS5. And only part of that is due to the supply chain issues. So I think we're going to continue to see gaming become more accepted, faster, better. It's getting to where it's so photorealistic, it's eerie. I think we're hitting that uncanny valley area. And that's cool coming from, growing up playing with Atari. So,
right,
it's a heck of a journey.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I remember during the pandemic, I'm a huge Formula One fan. And during the pandemic, when there wasn't racing, they actually were showing some of the F1 game basically. And they had a lot of the younger actual drivers playing on that because there's not a leap between physical athlete and esports athlete within Formula One racing because they use actually those same games to simulate to physically drive the different tracks. Yeah, exactly. So it only makes sense that they would be great at that. And the photorealism, you're right, is it took me a few minutes to be like, that's a video game. That's not a replay.
Yeah, I mean, how cool is that? And the simulators they set up for things like that, for like the professional drivers who actually play the games.
Yeah, with the whole kit. I know.
They basically build the whole F1 cockpit down to the ridiculously expensive real steering wheel that they use in the actual car.
Yeah.
And they're playing the game. And that there is a brilliant example. That's not that far a stretch from what we've done with fighter pilots and FAA pilots for decades with full simulators. Well, that's something you can get. Now, you're not getting the full experience, but that's something you can kind of get pretty close to at home now if you want to. And that's amazing.
I know it is. Well, for listeners who wanted to find out more about what we talked about today, how can they reach out?
Absolutely. So as always, the best resource on the web for Samsung technologies, at least the commercial ones, is displaysolutions.samsung.com. Definitely check that out. You want to look at the Odyssey and Odyssey Neo gaming monitors. They have their the G3, G7, G9, great solutions. The Odyssey Arc, absolutely amazing. I mean, even if you're not in the market, go look at that one, folks, because it's just incredibly cool. Showed it at CES. It was one of those products that made me go, they aren't actually going to bring that out. That's like a concept car, right? It is. Oh, no, it's actually available. Like I could order one. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So go check it out. And of course, if you want to learn more about any of the consumer products, Samsung.com, as always, would be fantastic. So yeah, there you go.
Excellent. Well, Jonathan, as always, a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Shelby. I greatly appreciate it. And thanks to everyone out there in audience land for spending some time with us today.
Yeah, thank you, listeners, for tuning in and subscribing to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. If you like this episode or have a question, please join the discussion on Twitter with the hashtag B2B Tech Talk. Until next time, I'm Shelby Skrhak.
You've been listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. This episode was sponsored by Ingram Micro's Imagine Next. B2B Tech Talk is a joint production with Sweetfish Media and Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro production handled by Laura Burton and Christine Fan. To not miss an episode, subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform.